everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and this week's contract tip has to do with the costs that a seller pays for a buyer who is getting a VA insured loan. So, excuse me, this topic is a little bit tricky, but when a VA borrower, and the only reason a borrower or a buyer can get a VA insured loan is if the buyer is a veteran and has served our country. Being a veteran and serving our country, the person is eligible for one of the perks would be a VA insured loan. When a buyer is getting a VA insured loan, there are certain costs that buyer is not allowed to pay. Now, depending on the contract under which you are binding, these costs are itemized. So let's look at the VA loan contingency in the GAR contract form. So that is form F65 VA loan contingency exhibit. And in that exhibit, on paragraph 14, it says certain fees paid by seller. Notwithstanding any provision to the contrary contained in this agreement or in this exhibit attached hereto, seller shall pay all of the following amounts to the extent the same are charged as part of this transaction, even if they exceed the seller's contribution to the buyer's closing costs. A, termite letter. I'm going to stop right here. We know that currently, right now, a buyer getting a VA insured loan, it is absolutely required that there is a termite clearance letter. And so that is one of the fees, regardless if it is in the purchase as a special stipulation, the purchase and sale or not. Buyers getting a VA insured loan must have a termite clearance letter. So back to the exhibit. Termite letter, loan closing or settlement fees, document preparation fees, preparing loan papers or conveyance fees, attorney service other than for title work, photographs, interest rate lock-in fees, postage and other mailing charges, stationery, telephone calls and other overhead, amortization schedules, passbooks, and membership or entrance fees, escrow fees or charges, notary fees, preparation or assignment of mortgage to other secondary market purchasers, trustees' fees or charges, loan application or processing fees, fees for the preparation of the truth in lending disclosure statement, fees charged by loan brokers, finders or other third-party fees, and tax service fees. Then under paragraph 14b, it states, any other fees, costs, or charges which are not allowed by the VA to be paid by the buyer. Then there's a paragraph that says the above referenced costs, and there's a checkbox where the buyer and the seller negotiate, are or are not included in the items paid by the seller at closing, at the closing subsection of the closing cost paragraph that the seller may have agreed to pay in accordance with the seller. So basically the seller's contribution to closing costs. In the RE Forms VA loan exhibit, and that is RE Form 201 VA loan exhibit, again, it has a paragraph regarding the fees that the seller must pay. So under the paragraph seller obligations, and then paragraph 2 under the seller obligations, it states, at closing, the seller will pay all of the costs associated with the closing of this transaction, which are a condition of the closing of the VA loan, but that are not permitted to be paid by the buyer under the VA guidelines. These costs are included in the total amount, if any has been identified, that the seller may have agreed to contribute towards the buyer's closing costs in the above reference contract. So in the, there's a few differences there, but in the GAR exhibit, the buyer and the seller negotiate if those fees are included in closing costs or if those fees would be paid by the seller on top of the closing cost contribution the seller has already made to the buyer. In the RE loan exhibit, they are included in the closing costs. Now, you listing and selling agents, especially listing agents, you cannot special stipulation this out. Both of these loan exhibits state in the RE form, it says this exhibit shall control over any conflicting language in the above reference contract and any exhibit or addenda attached here too. And in the VA loan, in the GAR loan exhibit, it also has verbiage, exhibit controls. This exhibit shall control over conflicting or inconsistent provision set forth in any other exhibits to this agreement. So you can special stipulation out the seller paying those VA required fees. But it gets a little bit tricky because there's that whole list of items identified in the GAR, and in the RE form, it references the fees charged to and allowable, not allowable by the VA per the lender. So there is some lender, not discretion, I don't know if that's the word I want to use, but you guys, you need to check with the lender, the VA buyer's lender, to find out what fees are being charged and if the lender is charging a 1% origination fee, because that adds into the mix as well. So I want to thank you to Linda Kennedy of American Eagle Mortgage for supplying me with some information from the VA regarding the fees that are not allowed to be paid by the buyer, as well as some of the issues where a lender, depending on what how the lender is structuring the loan, what other fees are going to be assessed or not assessed. So part of this, and these forms are closing cost information for lenders, and there's a lot of information on here, and I will link it below. Again, please contact Linda Kennedy with American Eagle Mortgage for more specific information. And before you're in this situation, and in general, if you are already in this, in a contract with a VA borrower, check with that lender to find out what fees that lender is actually going to charge. So, but part of this states, finally, there are some fees that can never be paid by the veteran, regardless of whether the 1% origination fee was paid out or not. Those are termite inspection fee, termite/pest inspection fee, attorney fee charged as a benefit to the lender, mortgage broker fee, realtor commission, prepayment penalties, and HUD FHA inspection fees for builders. Then there are other costs that may or may not be charged. Again, it depends on if the lender is charging a 1% origination fee or not. Some fees that are allowed regardless, there are fees listed that are allowed regardless of that, and there are fees that are unallowed if the lender is charging that fee. So again, it's a little bit tricky, not necessarily complicated, just tricky, and a couple of things to consider when parties are going under contract and the buyer is getting a VA insured loan. Number one thing to consider is which contract are you binding under? Number two thing to consider is the seller making a contribution to the buyer's closing costs? Third thing to consider is, to remember is you always have to get a termite clearance letter. Other thing to consider is that actual buyer's lender. Are they charging a 1% origination fee or are they not? Because there are certain allowable and unallowable VA-related fees based on what the lender is, how the lender is structuring the loan for that buyer. So a little bit more information to find out on behalf of the VA borrower and the agents, but hopefully this contract tip helps you out just a little bit. Thank you so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.